Okay, so theater traditions and histories. So past, history, and tradition. What do those three things mean? So past is actually a reality of an earlier time. Um, so when you're thinking about museums and stuff, they're trying to preserve the past and, kind of hold on to our history with so that you can imagine things how they used to be before. So it's like all these dinosaurs trying to attack this other dinosaur. I don't even know if that's a full dinosaur there on the ground, but they look like they're eating whatever was left of that. So we try to, imagine time travel and going back in time and looking at things that happened a long time ago. We try to preserve our own memories, things that happened in our past through photography and scrapbooking and diaries. And so like, this is a picture of my past. This is little Miss Gigi. Okay. And this is my mom. So we try to do this too. Everybody does it. All people do it somehow to try to preserve their past. Okay, let's look at history now. So history is a representation of the past. We don't really know what happened in the past, but we're trying to recreate it. They always say that history is written by the victors. Those are the people that won whatever war it was. And so they wrote what happened in history. You don't always hear from the other side. So we tried to research, we tried to attempt to capture the past. By definition, history can only be partial because it's written from incomplete sources. Because like I said, we only get one side of the story. With the bias of the moment and its composition and its authors, even if the person who's writing, even more modern day, the person who's writing it was a victim of what went on, we still only see it through one person's eyes. So everyone has a little bit of a bias when they're writing. Okay, no text can actually recreate the full sensory, emotional, physical fact of an earlier time. Some try, but just writing it down doesn't give you all the feeling of all the people that were going on at that time. Okay, now let's look at tradition. What does tradition mean? So tradition, it refers to the past and it's based on the past, but it's something that we do in the present. Right now, as I'm recording this, it's close to Christmas time, and I still have yet to decorate my Christmas tree. And that's a tradition. That's something that we do in this society, is put up a tree and put ornaments on it and put lights on it. So something that happened in the past. Theater and performance are kind of exciting and complex mediums that try to preserve the past through tradition. Our tradition is showing you what went on, showing you this script that was written that refers to things that happened in the past, perhaps, or even made up stories. In theater, tradition is not the same as the past, but it is a present carrying out of something that's recalling or representing some long-standing practices of maybe how they performed these plays in the past. Societies invent traditions to help preserve and perpetuate their cultures, consolidate political power, consolidate their collective identities, and give meaning to their lives. So I have here a picture of a quinceañera, because I live in San Antonio, and most of the people here understand what a quinceañera is and how that's part of tradition and what it is. Weddings are another example of traditions, things that we do. Somebody wearing a big dress with a long veil on it, or dressed in white or specific colors. These things are traditions that we carry on. Okay, ritual and the search for origins of theater. Where did it actually start? Nobody really knows. So humans have performed for each other for religious and political and entertainment purposes all over the world and throughout time. So in all sorts of different places, we have had entertainment. We have had one person watching while somebody else does, whether that be a dance, whether it be, again, in religion, going to a service and having someone that we're all looking at talking to us, and rituals that take place there. Here, in medieval times, we have the knights that are, in battle and jousting while these people up here watching and playing music. So, there's that. So again, where did theater come from? Well, there's a thing called the Cambridge School Theory, and it was derived from an anthropology, mostly on the works of James Frazer. So this is James Frazer, not to be confused with the guy in the Outlander story. Okay, not the same guy. This James Frazer, he wrote a book called The Golden Bough. Okay, it was his monumental work. It's been reproduced over and over again, and it was first published in 1890, and it attempted to derive stable archetypes out of all the world's religions and mythologies. He looked at what he thought was all the world's religions and mythologies at the time that he could find in 1890. And he decided that they all kind of started the same way. Theater researchers noted that there were similarities between the theater's principles of substitution and the ways which religious and spiritual rituals from around the world also have a similar kind of role playing. Basically, what the Cambridge School Theory was, well, almost all religions begin with some sort of one person talking or performing or reenacting something for other people watching. So their determination was, this is the way theater began. It began through religious means. Whatever that religion was, if there was a shaman or if there was a focal point that people gathered, and that the person actually took on a performance role. And that's where we kind of started theater. So that is one theory of how theater started. Okay, what is a shaman? Shamanism is part of this theory, right? So there was a shaman, there was a person, there was a religious figure. So a shaman is a person with special relationship between the material world and the invisible spiritual world. Okay, and shamans have been employed like in many, many cultures to cure the sick, aid the hunter, conjure the rain, help the crops grow. In many shamanistic practices, the shaman performs in the state of a trance, a level of consciousness beyond everyday awareness, where they function as mediums. They're hosting an animal spirit or a godly spirit in their human bodies. They go into a trance and they allow some other being to enter them, and then they talk or enact through that body, that spirit does. And these have existed in many, many cultures. A lot of times ecstatic dancing and rapturous chanting are primary features of shamanism, usually climaxing in some violent shaking of some sort. And acrobatic feats are common. So they'll do some sort of incredible backflips or things like that. Okay, so shamanism employs things that we associate with the theater: costumes, body paint, headdresses, masks, and those things disguise the shaman performer, sometimes completely, marking them as like a spiritual presence. Excuse me, I forgot to turn off my phone. Okay. So we have face paint, we have, headdresses, we have masks, and mask remains a prominent symbol of drama around the world. So in drama, we frequently use masks. We kind of owe it back to the ancient Greeks, how they used masks to change characters quickly. But masks have been used throughout many, many cultures around the world. Okay, some shamanistic rituals incorporate dialogue along with impersonation. So in doing that, then they begin to contain dramatic elements. Okay, dialogue has many of theater's elements. It uses imitation to create suspense or conflict or danger and action. You know, they're starting to reenact things, and so they're delving into theater. Okay, in sub-Saharan Africa, we can still see a vast variety of traditional performances. So traditional, that they're doing things that their ancestors did and their ancestors did to recall that past time. But ritual and storytelling are all interwoven. Many of these African cultures have long-standing traditions of some dance dramas.
Gauli Tama dance. Dance of the Gauli mask is performed by the Baule ethnic group. The Gauli originated among the Wan people, neighbors of the Baule. It was adopted by the Baule in the 1900s. Today, it is a dominant traditional dance form, gradually replacing all others. It may be performed on special occasions such as funerals or simply for entertainment. Dancers who perform this dance wear 4 different types of traditional masks in specific order. The masks have complex symbolism. At each stage, one mask is male and another time female. It is difficult to tell them apart since their differences are very subtle. Zauli dance. This is probably the most satisfying traditional dance ever. Zauli is a traditional dance style of the Guro people. The Zauli mask used in the dance was created in the 1950s, reportedly inspired by a girl named Jelalu Zauli. However, stories about the origins of the mask are varied, and each mask can have its own symbolic history. Each Guro village has a local Zauli dancer who is always a male, because this is no fit for a lady. Zauli is believed to increase the productivity of the location it is performed in and seen as a tool of unity for the Guro community and, by extension, the whole country. Boloye dance. This is by far the most acrobatic African dance ever. The Boye or Panther dance is a traditional dance style from the Senufu ethnic group in the northern part of Ivory Coast. The dance was once performed at funerals, but now has become a dance of rejoicing. However, it retains its sacred character and mythical powers, such as the power to make rainfall. The name Boloye is due to the dancers' appearance, who are always dressed in a beige costume and patterns that refer to panther skin. These details lead many to qualify Boloye as a mythical or sacred dance capable of affecting individuals and the community that performs it. Umian traditional dance. The Akan people of Ivory Coast use the word Komian to refer to trance. The dance is mainly performed by women who have been initiated to communicate with the gods through different divinatory ways, such as the throwing of shells, looking on water, or in the case of this video, dance. The dance is truly the most spectacular divinatory form used in solving problems among the people. Accompanied by the rhythm of tam-tams, the dance continues until the chief priestess reaches the status of trance. The gods then will manifest themselves at the opening of her mouth to communicate the nature of the problem and how to solve it. Abisa Festival Dance. Pisa is the main festival in the Nzima calendar, celebrating the time of renewal and forgiveness. It is dedicated to Nyami, an Akan name for supreme deity. The festival lasts for 14 good days, and throughout the period, work activities or social ceremonies such as weddings or funerals are suspended. The beat of the cosmic drum frees every Nzima from all unusual restrictions and allows them to speak freely, dance freely, and wear whatever costume they want to wear. This normally sees men dress as women while getting their groove on. Now, which of these dance moves got your attention the most? Leave us a comment down there. Do share with a friend on Facebook, WhatsApp, and Twitter. As usual, I'm your host, Murphy, and I'll catch you in the next video.
Okay. So in shamanistic performances, the theater of magic and substitution, the theater magic of substitution is employed in ways that may very well give material form and truth to an invisible world. This is certainly the promise and the reassurance that ritual performance forms attempt to provide for their audiences. Okay, now this is another way that theater is thought to have been created. Passion plays. And at least these are three passion plays that we talk about. So the first one is Jesus's crucifixion. So passion plays are, the word passion is used to describe the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And passion plays were a type of medieval European Christian Catholic performance in which church members would act out scenes from the life of Jesus Christ. I think it's interesting that they put Christian Catholic in parentheses because at this time, if you were a Christian, you were Catholic. Everyone was Catholic who was a Christian. It was just one church. They didn't break off into other sects until the Protestant Reformation. So the Passion refers specifically to Jesus's material body and to his arrest and crucifixion. And so they used to do these plays that were theatrical reenactments of those events from the Bible. And these are all different stages that they would perform on, and they would kind of string them all together on wagons. And like it would start with Adam and Eve in the beginning of time, and it would go through the crucifixion. And actually, you know, this was ended up in hell. So we have like heaven and hell. This thing is called the hell mouth. And if it might be fun if you decided that you wanted to play a demon. Oh, there I am again. Okay, if you wanted to play a demon, you could play a demon and come out of the hell mouth, and people thought that was really fun. The play was done as an act of faith and education for the medieval European masses of people who were typically illiterate. They didn't read. They might have a Bible, but they didn't know how to read it. And they had very few other means of studying scripture and theology. And this is like right after the Middle Ages, which was 1,000 years of no theater. We had, you know, the Greeks and the Romans, and then those guys were pagan and they did theater. So we were going to ban theater. So other than little troops here and there, they didn't really have theater. And it kind of came back around 1000 BC, or 1000 AD, excuse me. Like, you know, the year 1000 or 1100, something like that. And this is how it came back. It came back through religion, and they had these religious plays. There is a place in Germany. Let me see if I can say this right. Oberammergau. The Oberammergau Passion Play was founded in 1634 by a small German town called that. And it was a collective vow of gratitude for the end of a plague that they had been going through. But it's medieval in its content, and it's still being performed today. For 400 years, they perform this play every year. And it's huge. The play requires about 2,000 people to be in the play, 2,000 townsfolk, people in the town as actors, musicians, technicians, and they create this 5 to 7 hour long 16-act performance. And it ends in the crucifixion of Jesus. And after decades of activism, finally, the play script was rewritten in time for the 1990 production, and many changes were made. And the changes actually had new music, and married women and women over the age of 35 were now able to participate. Okay, if you're younger than 35, sorry, ladies, you can't participate in this, but I guess they figure over the age of 35 because then you're not going to get married. I don't know. But finally, you know, married women and women over the age of 35 were allowed to participate, as well as Muslim participants were finally able to join the cast. So this is a huge thing, and we're going to watch just a little bit of it.
Hallelujah! Er ist erstanden!
So that's the little advertisement, and I guess it said every 10 years. I had heard that it was every year, but maybe it is only every 10 years, which would kind of make it more plausible that all these 2,000 people get together every 10 years to do it. That would seem like, okay, I can participate rather than every year. Because I imagine you have to start a year in advance to try to get the thing together because there's so many people involved. All right, another passion play is called the Abydos Passion Play. And for many theater historians, it was a rite in Egypt, and they think that this is the oldest known ritual drama, that this may have been the real origin of theater. The Abydos was, it's the story of Osiris and how he was killed and how his sons came back and he was brought back to life. And so it's also called a passion play because there's a death and then there's a resurrection. It's not performed right now. So it's really history rather than tradition because it's not performed every year as we do the passion play of Jesus. But the only historical record that survives and makes us even think that this happened is called the Enkenofret Stela, which is an engaged stone slab, and it contains the testimony of a priestly companion to the pharaoh, Sensuret II. Okay, and it's really kind of hard to see. This looks like a bird on here to me, but it's just kind of this stain that was on there. And all of these are little writings. Okay, this is a huge stone slab, and it contains basically the play and how it was performed. The European historians and archaeologists who translated it gave the story of Osiris's murder and resurrection by the help of his son Horus and wife Isis the name Passion Play because it reminded them of the death and resurrection of Jesus. So these are kind of some of the little things that are on it down there that you can't really see. Okay, the third passion play that your book references is called the Tazeya, if I'm saying it correct. It's a living traditional theater carried out by Shiite Muslims in Iran. Okay, it reenacts the martyrdom of the early Muslim leader Hussein and his sons and companions. The Passion Play is part of the tradition, meaning that it's also spiritually inflected, like there's some sort of spiritualness involved. And this one's a reenactment of the death of an important religious leader. Okay, Ta'ziya is considered virtually the only theater form indigenous to the Islamic culture due to Islam's strong taboos against creation and various forms of representation, not creation of the earth, but for them to create something, because only Allah is supposed to be able to create life. And if you mimic something, it looks like you're trying to create something that you did not create, but only Allah did. So it's very suspect in Islamic context. But so, as you can see, the people are very upset. They are killing the children at the time. So that is, that's why everybody's sad and crying. Okay. The Ta'ziya performance, a lot of them distance themselves from the sense of creation, because remember, they're not supposed to create anything. Only Allah is supposed to be able to create things. And so they carry their script in their hands. I don't know if you noticed that the little boy who was running around in the beginning, he had actually a little piece of paper in his hand that he was kind of reading his lines off of. It looks like the other ones had it memorized, but they might do it every year and every year. But they're trying to emphasize that they're playing a role. They're not becoming someone else. As we talk about in theater, we want to, as an actor, I want to become the character that I am. They want to distance themselves and show you that this is only a representation. They are not becoming the character. So this one is reading his lines, you know, as they're, whatever's going on, they're killing him and his family, I'm not sure, in this particular scene. But both professional and amateur, all male companies perform the Ta'ziya all around Iran and in multi-day events. The centerpiece play, it depicts the murder of Hussein, is most always played on the same date every year. It's the 10th of Muharram, the day in history on which the actual event occurred. So I don't know if you noticed, even when we were looking at that last little video, but the whole audience was also male. So I don't know if women come to these things or if they have to sit in a different area if they do. So very interesting. Okay, now we're moving on to India. The Natyasastra is a book. And it talks about, it details all the, it analyzes Sanskrit theater, much the way Aristotle, his book, the Poetics, detailed everything that was supposed to happen in a Greek tragedy. Well, this book was written around the same time that Aristotle wrote the Poetics. And it's very similar in that it instructs people how they should put on these kinds of performances. So it talks about the theater buildings, the actual drama text. It talks about the acting, the staging, the music, what kind of gestures to use, what kind of dance to use, and even how to organize your theater company. And the treatise describes 10 major genres of Sanskrit drama. So remember, Aristotle just talked about tragedy, and we do believe that he had another one where he talked about comedy, but it's been lost to the world. But there was comedy and tragedy. In Sanskrit, there's 10 different genres that he talks about in this writing. And the two primary ones, the two most important ones, kind of like our tragedy and our comedy, are the Nataka. It's based on well-known historic stories of kings or sages. And then there's the Prakarana, which is based on love stories. So either they're going to tell some histories of some kings or some stories of noble people, or they're going to tell love stories. Those are the two primary Sanskrit dramas. Sanskrit theater was performed indoors within roofed buildings. They were rectangular in structure, and they were about 48 by 24 feet, and the buildings could seat somewhere between 200 and 500 spectators. So not a small theater, about a medium-sized theater. If you think about, let's see, 200 and 500 spectators. I'm trying to think of something that's about that size. I can't really. Maybe the public theater. It's probably seats about 500. So it was a good audience. It was a good audience. This was specific. This is what was written in the Yanadnastra. There were two doors with an onstage. There were two doors back here, okay, with an onstage orchestra between them. People back here were the orchestra. And this is access to the dressing area behind the stage. And there were 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, that held up the roof for an upper pavilion. There was a roof over the top of this, all inside the theater. Okay, and there were carved wooden elephants and tigers and snakes and everything adorning these pillars here. You see the 1, 2, 3, 4 pillars. There's 2 doors in the back there that you can't see, but that's also where the orchestra would be. And they also adorned the ceiling of this little flat roof here. The performers were all from priestly castes. So remember, in India, they had the caste system. And so you had to be from that certain caste in order to perform. And they trained from early childhood. They danced and acted with onstage instruments and percussive accompaniment. So there were like flutes and drums and gongs and things like that. The Sanskrit drama itself kind of died out around the 10th century due to the Muslim invasions. But people have brought it back and they still do it today, but it's more of a historical look at it rather than writing new things. So in succeeding centuries, many new traditions of dance drama formed. All forms, though, use the Natya Sastra as their starting point, and they typically tell stories derived from the great Hindu epics like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. There we go. And this is a sample of the Kathakali form. It's very interesting. They a lot of times people sing for them, and they enact whatever it is that they're doing. And there's a singer on stage telling the story. Sometimes they sing, but they have these this makeup and these things that they glue onto their face to. I can only call them prosthetics. So, but they make them look like whatever the god it is that they are portraying. Okay, so let's look at this. Let me close my face. Here we go. Notice their fingers. All right. So 8 to 11 regional traditions are typically endorsed by the Ministry of Culture in India, while dozens of other forms also persist across the diversity of the subcontinent. Of the main 8 forms, Bharatanatyam, Mohiniyattam, and Odissi are all typically performed by solo women, while others are male-dominated or feature both men and women. So this is one of the men and women. All of these traditional forms are more of a dance drama than they are spoken, and they employ conventionalized gestures with specific meanings called mudras. I want you to notice in all of these, their hands and their fingers are in very, very specific positions. It's kind of a sign language. They all mean something different. If you noticed, I was telling you to watch the hands of the people that were dancing before, but these are the mudras. Young dancers here demonstrate beautiful costumes, accessories, and postures of the Odissi dance, including the mudras hand gestures. It's an important codified element of most classical Indian dances. Each one of the finger moves means something different. So it's really interesting. And there's a whole lot of these, but the mudras are very, very important in the Indian theater. Okay, now we move to China. So the first well-defined Chinese opera form was called zaju, and it appeared in China during the Song dynasty, which is in our 10th century. They measure things according to who was in power at the time, rather than we will say, oh, that happened in, 900 AD, or, the 5th century BC. They measure it according to who was in power. So the Song dynasty. And the zaju was comedic. It was a music dance drama with lots of acrobatics and clowning. It had 4 acts, and each scene had to feature a character singing and an emotional climax. So the tightening of the structure kind of led rise to a more stately, aristocratic, and poetic opera form known as kungfu, which originated from the town of Kunshan in the 16th century. So kungfu, they had these 4 acts, they all ended in something climatic, and it was more comedic. Then they decided to refine it more and make it more proper. But then there was another popular form that developed around the 16th century in the form of a boisterous clapper opera. They called it a clapper opera because it was characterized by the furious rhythmic beating of drumsticks on a hardwood block. So they take these sticks and like clack, 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 and it sounded like clapping. So they call it the clapper opera. In subsequent years after that, they saw the rise of other regional styles influenced by the zaju, kungfu, and clapper opera forms. And as a result of all this intermixing, China today now sports as many as 360 variations of Chinese opera, and most of them are known by their regional origins. So if you translate that to where we live here in Texas, Austin would have a specific opera. San Antonio would have a different opera. Houston would have a different opera. Dallas would have a different opera. Whatever region you lived in would have a different form. And we're going to watch this one thing that shows you a little bit of the Chinese opera.
什么？你今日起救命吗？你。
Okay, so the most famous Chinese opera in modern times is called the Beijing Opera, and it's known in Chinese as the Jingju, or the Theater of the Capital. So the Jingju was founded in 1790 when it was a celebration of the emperor's birthday. So it was his 80th birthday, and this group of people came from the mountains of Anhui, and they came to Beijing and they wanted to perform for the emperor, and they performed and they were amazing and had incredible acrobatic moves and acrobatic styles. And this is where you hear a lot of the Chinese acrobats and stuff like that. And so the new capital style arose, and the emperor said, this is now our opera, and this is what all of our operas should be like. And so that was kind of the Beijing opera is, or Jingju is what is like the most important one that is known. It's the most famous one. And so they had a lot of physicality to it. So the four main skills of the EXQ are singing, which is Chang, speech, which is Nian, acting and movement, which is the Zhou, and martial arts and acrobatics, which is the Da. And these skills are employed to tell famous stories, which are already likely known by the audience. It would be as if you went to go see, I tell my students in class, if you went to go see Batman, all right, so we pretty much all know the story of Batman. We've probably seen or read about Batman several different times in different ways. But if they came out with a new Batman movie, we might go see it again just to see how it looks, just to see how it's told. Or Spider-Man. I don't know how many times we've done Spider-Man movies, or Superman. You know the story, but let's go see how this one is told. Let's go see what the spin is on this one. So they'll go see a show that that maybe they already know what it's like and what it's about. But so a lot of these are based on that. They already know the story, they already know what it's about, and they're going to see how this one is performed. Okay, so there are four character types. There is the Sheng, which is the male protagonist here. There is the Dan, and the Dan is all female roles. Many of these are played by men. They used to all be played by men. Now they're allowing some women to play the women's roles. Okay, but this is the four different types of performers. The Jing, which is the painted face roles here. And these are usually like gods or demons or some sort of supernatural beings. And then the Chao, which are the clown characters. So the guy who fell backwards that we saw a little bit earlier, that would have probably been a Chao character. The costumes and makeup are very conventionalized, and they help everybody in the audience know what this character is. They look at the different kinds of makeup, And if there's red makeup, if they're wearing red makeup, that indicates bravery and loyalty. But if they have green on their faces, those people are violent or they're impulsive. Movements include a rapid heel-to-toe walk and contorted body bending maneuvers, sudden jerks and freezes, and a thrilling display of full stage acrobatics. And we're going to look at that right now. So in Sichuan opera, they wear masks. In other of the traditional theaters in China, they paint these on their faces, okay? And each of these is a different character, and the different techniques indicate the nature or the different fearsome warrior characters. So each of these is a different person, and if these are painted on their faces, or they wear the mask in Sichuan opera, then the audience knows who they are and what that particularly means. Okay. Yep. I gotta move this, can't see this. The Chinese opera has never been dependent on scenery. So most of the times there's not a set behind them. They have the whole world is conjured through the simple manipulation of props. Things that they hold in their hand indicate everything that they need to indicate, whether it's a sword or a bowl or, you know, whatever it is just something that they hold in their hands. They also have, there's always music. So the Chinese opera singing, much of it's like an extreme falsetto, like you heard the person who was singing before. It's accompanied by percussive ringing of gongs and cymbals, excuse me, clapper claps and drum beats, and the furious strumming of various two-stringed fiddles. Since the mid to late 20th century, the tradition of men playing women's roles has given way to an integration of women performers throughout all the remaining forms of the ziku. So like I said, women are finally playing the women's roles. Okay, now we move from China over to Japan. So Japan's No theater is said to be the oldest continuously performed style theater in the entire world. In the 14th century, No rose to prominence when a young performer named Zimi performed with his family in front of the shogun. And Zimi then codified the form by authoring dozens of play texts and writing down his theories and his techniques of performance in secret documents intended only for training his descendants. So a lot of this happens in Asian types of theater where it's a family thing. And as your children grow up, they are trained in the art. And when they come of age, then they are able to perform. And a lot of this training, you know, takes place, again, at a very, very young age. But when he wrote it down, the shogun loved it. He kind of like said, yes, this is a wonderful type of theater. And so he wrote all this stuff down, including different plays and how to do them and how to perform and costumes and all the different techniques and stuff. But he didn't want to share it with anyone. It was all secret. Today, however, those people have access to them, and it's still very codified. In other words, the movements and the things, they all have meaning. And the people who are watching the theater understand the meanings that are assigned to different things, much like how in the Indian theater, you know, different finger movements meant different things. Well, the different ways that people walk, the different ways that people move, the different types of masks, the different costumes and stuff, all has special meaning and people know who they are. If I walked out, dressed in blue with a red cape with a big S on my chest, you would know I was being Superman. Okay. You would look at me and go, okay, these costumes have that same meaning to the people that are watching them. They know who these people are by what they're wearing and how they move and what they look like. But now there's a set stage plan and it has spectacular costumes and it's always an all-male cast. It follows very strict rules and the main character is performed by a masked actor called the Shiti. And the Shiti appears in two halves of the play. First, disguised as an ordinary person, and then in their true supernatural form as a ghost or a god or a demon or a monster later on in the second half of the play. So, but people understand this. The Waki is a side actor. This is like the sidekick, okay? And they are usually don't have any makeup on. They don't have any mask on. And they are kind of the proxy of the audience. As they understand what's going on in the world of the play, the audience understands as well. They're kind of like that person that's there to help move the story along so the audience understands what's happening. So recitation of the main character's lines oscillate between being chanted by the Shiti and the chorus. So sometimes the actor is saying the lines himself, and sometimes the chorus is saying the lines that are going on in his head. So this is kind of a, let me move my little thing here. This is the Shiti, and this is the Waki over here, the side character who is watching what's going on, just what the audience is. This is the Cohen, which is the chorus in the back. This is the chorus over here, the geotype, and then these are the musicians in the back. I'm not sure what the Hayashi is. Okay, so there's that. I'm trying to move my little picture here. Okay. Nose language, it's also poetic and it's elliptical at times, meaning that it repeats itself and says the kind of same thing over and over again. And it's at times really obscure, like you have to really know what's going on to understand what's happening in the play. And so the cast is small and the action is relatively static, meaning they don't move around all that much. And it says here, by contemporary standards, nearly glacial, which means you know how fast a glacier moves. Okay, it's like, oh my gosh, will the story just move along, please? So it's really slow moving. So the stage itself has a lot of real conventionalized features. So there's always, this is all inside, but it has its own roof and it's very specific dimensions. Okay, there's a roof over the playing area. The long hashigakari is a walkway, this walkway right down here. And it connects the main stage space to the backstage so that people can go out. And there's small pine trees here, little tiny pine trees lining the hashigaraki. And one large, quote, old pine tree, the big tree here in the middle, painted on the back wall of the stage. This is every stage that does the No Theater. This isn't just one particular theater building. They're all built this way and they all have the pine tree and they all have the walkway and it's all very specifically measured and has these little railings and has these 4 pillars and it's all very, very specific. So, you know, we have several different kinds of theaters. We have a proscenium, we have a thrust, we have the flexible that could be anything. We have theater in the round. This is it for the No Theater. This is the only stage that you can perform on. So the actors' costumes are large and showy, along with masks and on-stage musicians and chorus. So these are the chorus over here. These are the musicians in the back. Today, they say No is a connoisseur's theater, meaning that an audience member, they have to be well educated and an eye attuned to all the details of the no theater in order to enjoy the performance. Okay, I'm going to pause that right there because that is another clip that I want to show you. I was looking for that clip and I couldn't find it. I'm very happy to have found it there. Okay, so Kaijin. Kaijin is related to no, but it's really comedic and silly. And there's a lot of hijinks. There's like naughty servants, there's slapstick, and a whole lot of fun stuff that goes on. It takes place on the same stage. They use the same stage that the No Theater does. It's usually like taking place when there's a whole series of No Theater going on. The Kaijin kind of steps in as the comic relief. It's between the other plays. It's between the serious plays. And it lends its actors to, it even lends the actors to many scenes in the No Theater. So people perform in the No Theater, then also will go and do the Kaijin as well. All right, so right after the No, now this is the Kaijin that happens on the same stage.
さて、この旅こそは水もが飲まねばならないとその手で飲まれるものだろうな。ああ、これ、酒がこぼる、酒がこぼるのは嫌。またそっちに飲まれるだわ。相手するの、それはやっぱり。何この上が上なんだ。あ、もうこりゃ。
Kabuki was created in Kyoto around 1600 by the legendary shrine maiden Izumu Okuni. Okay, this is Izumu Okuni. It's a representation of her anyhow. It became really popular. She was a shrine maiden, and she created this form in a dry riverbed. And it was dancing and singing and performing, and it was wonderful. It became incredibly popular. And one of the popular subgenre was called the overnight pickle play, which drew inspiration from like a recent scandal. There was like this love or suicide, and they staged a play. And they call it overnight because it literally took place overnight, like it was a 12-hour play or something ridiculous like that, in my opinion. The funny thing is that eventually the powers that be banned women from performing in these shows because they thought it was, women showing themselves and singing and dancing or whatever was close to prostitution. So they banned women from being in the show that a woman actually created. Okay, so the like no theater, kabuki is mostly a hereditary vocation. It's passed down from father to son because remember, women can't be in it anymore. The women's roles of kabuki are played by role specialist called onagata, which translates more or less to woman pattern. So these are men who their specialty is playing women's roles. The major works fall into two categories in Japan. There's history plays and domestic plays. So history plays are plays that dramatize major political events of the remote past. And then the domestic plays deal with the affairs of townspeople, of merchants, lovers, courtesans of the playwright's era. Many of the kabuki's plays are of unknown authorship and have been augmented over centuries by the actors' additions. So a play turned out to be this, an actor threw something new in, the next performer kept that and then threw something else new in, and so on and so on. So we don't even really know what the original script was because it's been changed by the different performers and stuff. Okay, so now we will show you a little bit of kabuki.
Kabuki is a Japanese traditional theatre form which originated in the Edo period at the beginning of the 17th century and was particularly popular among townspeople. After 1868, when Japan opened up to Western influences, actors strove to heighten the reputation of kabuki among the upper classes and to adapt the traditional styles to modern tastes. Today, kabuki is the most popular of the traditional styles of Japanese drama. Important characteristics of kabuki theatre include its particular music, costumes, stage devices, and props, as well as specific plays, language, and acting styles, such as the miyu, in which the actor holds a characteristic pose to establish his character. Originally, both men and women acted in kabuki plays, but eventually only male actors performed the plays, a tradition that has remained to the present day. Male actors who specialize in women's roles are called onagata. Two other major role types are aragoto, rough style, and wagoto, soft style. The actors speak in a monotone voice and are accompanied by traditional instruments. are about historical events and moral conflict in affairs of the heart. The kabuki stage is equipped with several devices, such as revolving stages and trapdoors, through which the actors may appear and disappear. Another speciality of the kabuki stage is a footbridge, hanamichi, that extends into the audience. Keshi, the special makeup, provides an element of style that is easily recognizable, even by those unfamiliar with the art form.
Okay. Next is bunraku. And someone told me I was saying that wrong. I hope I'm not. Maybe it's bunraku, but I've always called it bunraku. Anyhow, it's the most famous in Osaka, Japan. And many of its narratives, even the scripts, are shared with kabuki. Bunraku is a puppet theater. So this right here is a puppet, and there is a person behind it in a black costume so that you cannot see their face, moving the puppet. And they do almost the same scripts, several of the same scripts as the kabuki theater does. So it's really interesting. Each puppet is about 2/3 to 3/4 the size of a regular person. So they're not small puppets at all. And they require 3 puppeteers to work each puppet. It's an army of stagehands and costume and wig specialists to maintain these puppets. Sometimes the faces can change from a regular to a demon. So that's kind of cool. The puppeteers tend to be born into puppet families. So a lot like the kabuki and even the Peking opera of China, a lot of these Asian art forms, you have to be born into the family and you're raised in the family doing this at a young age, and they're passed down from family to family. They spend years first apprenticing to move the feet. That's the first thing you get to do. And then I think it's 3 more years or whatever, they go and they move to the left hand, and they finally reach their prime as the literal head puppeteer who also manipulates the right hand. So one person does the feet, one person does the left hand, and those people are all dressed in black. And the person who moves the head and the right hand, they don't have a cloth over their head. So you can see who that puppeteer is. So really interesting. I guess you're not worthy unless you can do that. That's the bunraku. Okay, now we're going to move over to Central America. So these are, again, some traditional theaters around the world. And in Central America, in Guatemala, they do a performance every year called the Rabanal Achi. And it's a dance drama, specifically in Guatemala. And it's highly ritualized. It has masked dancers with a repetitive chanted lines that tell the story of the conflict between the two nearby settlements, the Rabanal and the Quiche. And what happened was the Quiche, I think, came and they kidnapped the children of the Rabanal and took them away. And the Rabanal came and they fought against them to get their children back. And there's a big battle. And basically this story now is performed over and over again every year. And it, again, is very repetitive. And the dances are, pretty much the same over and over again. And they wear the masks to tell who people are. And the Rabanal Achi, it both keeps and transforms the meaning of the past, perpetuated into the present. So it's looking back at something that happened in the past, but it keeps it as a tradition, as a ritual. It's still a performance, and it's reenacting something that happened in the past, but it's exciting to be involved in it every year. So then we go over to West Africa. And in West Africa, there was a form of performance. It's kind of a music, praise singing, history keeping. It's known as Giro or Griot. And they use these specific instruments. And a lot of times whole families do this together. And it has kind of adapted and evolved into continuing serving the people of the Manding ethnicity. And over the centuries, griots sang and chanted genealogies and epic tales. So they are the performers of the village, and they came and they do storytelling, basically. They do storytelling while they're singing. They do songs and stories and, small reenactments. And they pass down the stories and the styles to maintain the historical and the family links between their ancestors and subsequent generations. And they also do some improv. So they connect with new audiences, and then they pass that down. So this art form continues to evolve, but it pays tribute to stories of old. And again, whole families do this. A bunch of musicians, they'll all get together and they'll tell and reenact these stories. And it's more of a storytelling and singing than it is, wearing specific costumes to perform, but they use the specific instruments, and that's something that's important. Okay, now let's look at some theater traditions of the West. And there are many theatrical traditions from Europe, like commedia dell'arte and ballet and opera. And so commedia dell'arte, though, it developed in Italy back in the Renaissance, and it's an improv theater. Okay, they're kind of scripted, but very loosely. Each little piece of dialogue or business is called a lazzi, L-A-Z-Z-I, like lazy, okay? And they take these little pieces or vignettes and string them together. And they say, okay, we're going to do a performance. And first, let's do that bit where, you walk in and you see the guy and you fall flat on your face, that bit. Okay, we're going to do that bit. And then, we'll do the bit where the lovers come in and you have to separate them. All right. So they don't have their words written down, but they have the little bits of business that they string together. And this is actually what I want to show you is what some university did, and they kind of put it together. I'm only going to show you a little bit of it, but it kind of gives you an idea. First, they go and they introduce the characters. Commedia dell'arte has specific characters, and each of these characters are different. One of them is a clown character, Acapello, who's also called Harlequin. You might recognize that name, the one that wears the diamonds all the time, Harlequin. And they're a comic character. they're where the term slapstick came from. And a slapstick is literally, I'm trying to find the pen or something, like a stick, okay? So it's a stick, and they'd hold it up and they'd carry it with them, and at certain times they'd snap it. It would snap really hard on the ground. It would like clap together and make a noise like when they fell. And that was supposed to be funny. And so that's where we get the term slapstick comedy, as things like, you know, somebody falling on a banana peel and stuff like that. Okay, so let me stop sharing this. So they're going to introduce the characters first. They also have musicians and just little bits of business that they do.
Dottore!
Sono Zani.
Pantalone!
Mi dispiace, mamma mia.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Whoa,
You go.
But do it.
Whoa.
But do it again.
You go. Whoa. Exactly. See?
Whoa, oh yeah. Okay. Ready?
I can watch the whole thing, obviously, right? So that's a little bit of Commedia dell'arte. Okay, classical ballet and opera are two forms where the evolution of tradition is much slower to change. Commedia dell'arte, because it is it's improv, so it's going to change and change and change, and we still see elements of commedia today in theater. The things, keep evolving, and they all kind of go back to that time and that kind of improv. But classical ballet and opera, they have pretty much stayed fairly the same since the Renaissance time. But they're still popular. People still go and see them. Pageant. So pageant is interesting. Pageant is a form of community-oriented performance. And it had moments of great popularity and cultural primacy and long periods of disregard. So people have used it and then not used it again. So we can kind of think of pageants as today's parades. So the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade is certainly a pageant. Fiesta, if you go to any of the Fiesta parades, those are a pageant. There's especially, I would say Macy's is more of a pageant, because if you watch it, especially the way that we watch it on TV, there are full performances that go on the wagons. So, a wagon will come, it will stop, and they'll do a full performance, the Rockettes or, some marching band or something like that. And so that's, and again, our Fiesta parades have a little bit of that, but that's kind of what this pageant was. And pageants are bringing the theater through the town, or, seeing things like that. The Queen's Majesty's Passage. It began with the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, the first Queen Elizabeth, not the one that just passed away, in 1559, and its example of a pageant form. So Londoners cemented Elizabeth as their monarch through seeing her perform as such, while simultaneously acting out their allegiance and thus potentially cementing through their songs, their poetry, their scenography. There's a whole pageant tribute to Queen Elizabeth. And another kind of pageant reenactment kind of thing is the storming of the Winter Palace. It's a theatrical reenactment of a key event of the Russian Revolution in 1917, and 3 years later it was staged, like in 1920, and they reenacted the storming of the palace. If any of you have seen Anastasia, that's kind of the story from the nobles' point of view. But these were the common people, how they stormed the palace and got rid of the monarchs and stuff, and they reenacted it later. And like everybody's participating at the same time, so that's kind of a pageant thing. there's an annual Ramona pageant in Hemet, California, and it adapts this story that was written in an 1884 novel by Helen Hunt Jackson. And it's a cast of about 375 people. And there is a purpose-built outdoor amphitheater. And you can see this outdoor amphitheater has these huge steps coming down the mountain. Hemet, California is, kind of rocky and stuff. And at the Ramona Bowl Outdoor Amphitheater in Hemet, it provides a naturalistic backdrop to the romanticized story of Ramona and Alessandro. It's performed every April by a large community cast, and even as shown here, horses participate. If any of you have seen the movie Overboard, I think when they go back together, they talk about Ramona and Alessandro, and they call to each other and she jumps off the boat. That's what I think of every time I see this. Okay. So the history of Greek theater is one that inspires all kinds of experiments and new approaches to restaging this, these ancient Greek texts. Some people try to reenact it the way that it used to be, and some people try to do it very differently. So the tradition of how Greek tragedy was performed, integrated into the city-state society, is kind of now broken. Because it used to be that Greek tragedies were performed. There were 3 of them that were performed together, and then there was a comedy. And they did this at contests, and this was all in offerance to the god Dionysus. And who was the god of theater and also of wine? Okay, thing to remember, the Greek god of wine and theater and fertility. So there was much to celebrate, but now they don't do that as part of that religious celebration anymore. We just take these plays and kind of produce them. So the situation of Greek drama is also comparable to the saturation that Shakespeare has had in our society. So we all know who Shakespeare is. We know that he wrote. You may not know this, but Shakespeare did not come up with iambic pentameter. So iambic pentameter is the sing-songy way that the texts are written. So they go ba-da, 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 ba-da. It's 5, pentameter. Iambic is the stressed and unstressed stressed. Ba-da, 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 ba-da. To be or not to be, that is the question. But soft but light through yonder window breaks. It is the east and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon. This is the way that Shakespeare wrote. And a man named Christopher Marlowe actually came up with that way of writing, and it's called the mighty word. And Christopher Marlowe probably would have written many more plays and may have been as famous as Shakespeare, except when he was 27 years old, he was killed in a bar brawl. Fun facts, things to know. The guy who created the iambic pentameter that Shakespeare's famous for ended up dying in a bar fight. Sad story, because obviously he had promise. The reason that Shakespeare wrote in that kind of sing-songy rhyme was, first of all, it's very poetic, but second of all, it was easier for actors to memorize their lines if they could kind of memorize it. It's like memorizing a song versus memorizing a paragraph. Even though you know the meaning behind the paragraph, if you ever tried to memorize lines for a play, sometimes they get stuck in your head. But if you're memorizing a song that sings them, it's a lot easier. And so that's kind of one of the reasons that they wrote it that way. And Shakespeare, there are many people that think that Shakespeare wasn't really Shakespeare. Your text says, no, there was a person named Shakespeare. We know there was. He ran a theater. He was the manager of the theater. He had a couple of different groups. All the King's Men and the Chamberlain's Men were both Shakespeare's theater groups. So there is no doubt that Shakespeare did exist. I, however, have a little bit of a different take on it, and it's just something that I had heard. There was a man named Francis Bacon who is brilliant, the Baconian theories. He's a brilliant mathematician. He developed like codes and ciphers. Like when you hear to decipher, that means to like break the code. Well, he developed the codes on how to, you know, every third letter of the word, you take it out and it creates a new message, and for spies to, you know, send messages to for different battles and things like that. Anyhow, he's brilliant on many accounts, and many people believe that he actually wrote a lot of these plays. And the reason is that they were very political in nature. A lot of these plays were, and he couldn't put his own name to it, or he would have been banned by the king or arrested for sedition, you know, going against the king or something like that. And so that Shakespeare actually had this troupe. Shakespeare was running the troupe, and he gave them to Shakespeare and said, I just want to see these produced. You go ahead and put your name on them. Okay, another reason why they think that may be true is because they looked at Shakespeare's father, like legal documents and stuff like that. He ran a bookshop, and whenever it looked for his signature, he just had an X, meaning that he was illiterate. He didn't know how to sign his own name. We know that Shakespeare didn't spend a lot of time with his own kids. However, later on in life, they looked through documents that he had a son who died young named Hamnet, which is kind of like Hamlet, and a daughter, and they're looking at documents that she signed, and she has an X. So we have an illiterate father, the greatest mind in the English language, and then an illiterate daughter. Doesn't really all make that much sense. So that makes me lean towards, okay, maybe somebody else helped him to write these things, or maybe he didn't write them all, or maybe he wrote some of them and not all of them. A lot of times the other actors would also add to texts and, you know, create them, but the writing is beautiful. And so it is universally known. People take Shakespeare's writing now and they restage Shakespeare, and it's become kind of a tradition. At San Antonio College, they're going to be doing A Midsummer Night's Dream and restaging it as it took place in the 1980s. So that should be interesting. One of the best theater productions I've seen of Hamlet, they took a play called Taming of the Shrew and set it in the 1950s. And so like there was a poet and they made him like a beatnik. And there was a singer and they made him like, you know, a 1950s rock and roll guy. And like there are times when the guy's talking about his horse and he actually has a Harley on stage. And so it all ended up working out really well. So I'm interested to see how the 1980s Midsummer Night's Dream is going to work. But people do that a lot with Shakespeare. They take it, this is As You Like It. They did it in Central Park, all dressed in contemporary kinds of clothes, but they're still a king, right? Some people take it and do different things with it. I think this may be Othello, or it might be the Scottish play with the witches. I'm not sure. But scripts are mostly staged without much of the attention due to the historical styles of Elizabethan theater. They don't, most of them are not really looked at like Elizabethan theater, although this one up here is. So some people are, you know, they really want to stick to the script. They really want to do it the way Shakespeare did it in Shakespeare's time. Remember when Shakespeare was doing it, some of that stuff was historical. Romeo and Juliet took place in like the 1300s and he was writing it in the 1600s. So, you know, this is the traditional dress that they have them in. And I believe this is more the 1600s performance wear, rather than the 1300s, where when it was supposed to have actually taken place. So original practices, OP buffs, they research and they try to recreate the 17th century playing styles and the pronunciation, as well as all the spaces and the scenography. Shakespeare, and during that time, they didn't have a lot of sets. They'd bring on a chair for a throne or something like that, but they did have some trap doors and some really cool things like that. One important site for this mixed historical and traditional pursuit is Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. So it's a theater consisting of 2 recreations of early modern English theaters, and it's on London's South Bank. The theater that is in existence right now was built in the 1990s. The original theater, I think, burnt down. And when this person went to go back and try to rebuild it, they had to build it several, like 200 yards from where the original was, because the river had changed course and now the river was flowing right where the theater used to be. So we're going to look at this little video just that talks about the theater. This is kind of a side view. It was open aired. So all of this is open. The sun shines down and that's how you get the lighting. Okay. The people would sit in these, you know, these different kinds of, or they would stand right in front of the stage. And those were called the groundlings. And the groundlings had the cheapest seats, but they were also pretty cool. You had to stand through the whole play, but you could also really see what was going on. All right, I'm going to stop sharing this.
Behind me is Shakespeare's Theatre, rebuilt recently, but it was originally constructed in the 17th century, and its name is the Globe, which comes from the expression everyone in the world is an actor. The conditions at the time when this would have been built were very different from the way actors work now. It was all done during the day because they didn't have enough money to afford candles to put on the plays at night. So there would have been far more interaction between the public and the actors. And in fact, the groundlings, which were the cheapest seats just under the open cover, they would shout at the actors and throw things at them if they didn't like the play. At the time as well, none of the actors were women because they weren't allowed to be in plays. And also the church was very critical of theatre. It called it the nest of the devil, and it was usually just outside the city walls because it wasn't really allowed in those days. It was seen as something very popular and affordable because, just as I said before, the cheapest seats could be afforded by everyone. So this is where the groundlings stand, and to come here it's only £5 to see a play, and they say it's one of the best places, even though if it rains, umbrellas aren't allowed, so you're going to get wet. But they say it would have been the best place as well because the audience participated, so you were right next to the actor's foot. You could see up his nose, and if he spat down at you, as I said, there's no umbrellas allowed, so it would have been a big problem. But there's great participation because the audience can see you, the actors, everybody's involved in the play, which makes kind of a difference from the typical West End play where everybody's in the dark. Here, you felt like you were really part of it.
Known as the heavens. There's a trapdoor in heaven as well, which is open at the moment. And you come down from heaven on labour. It does look quite dangerous.
The Globe Theatre puts on plays mainly by Shakespeare, and they're pretty authentic, even down to the finest details, like the original 17th century underwear. So it's probably not that comfortable. And nowadays, we go and see a play, but back then, the most important thing was the acoustics. It was more important that you heard the play. And so wherever you sat, the more expensive seats were the ones that had the best sound. The stage represents 3 different elements. The top with the zodiac signs, it's painted blue, represents heaven or the sky. There's even a trapdoor you can come down from. And the stage itself represents the earth, and there's a trapdoor to go underneath, which represents hell. This round shape kind of increases the sense of participation. The building itself, though, was hard to get permission for because, remember, in the 17th century it had burned down twice. So to make this thatched kind of roof after the Great Fire of London was pretty tough to do. It took them 8 years to get permission, but they finally managed to go ahead with it. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Not if it's a summer's day in London.
The globe. All right. So, some more tradition versus historical text. So Shakespearean drama's evolution to become simply a standard of modern theater is matched by some text from other historical theaters like the Spanish Golden Age Commedia. A large number of the plays from this period, 10,000 to 30,000 plays that we have from the Spanish Golden Age, they're still considered masterpieces today. Okay, whereas I think Shakespeare, I think we have 37 plays, something like that. So compare that time period in Elizabethan drama, you know, we may have 100 plays at the most. I don't think it's that many. But 10,000 to 30,000, that's quite a number of plays. So the Spanish Golden Age was quite a big deal. Especially their comedias. So Lope de Vega is, he was the most prolific playwright of that time. And he had as many as 1,800 plays that he wrote himself that we still have access to. 1,800 plays and several hundred shorter dramatic pieces, of which 431 are plays and 50 are shorter pieces. And they are extant, meaning that we can still get to them today. They performed in a special kind of theater called a chorale, and it actually is it's a courtyard. So it's kind of like Shakespeare, where it's in on all sides. However, they have seats down here instead of people standing up. And then there are seats on the side on the galleries. And there was a special place in the very back, kind of where this picture is being taken from, that was upstairs, and it was meant for single women. And single women could go and sit back there so that they wouldn't be harassed by, you know, men coming up to them and things like that. So it was a place where they could go and they could see theater, and they weren't considered improper for being out without a chaperone or something like that. So, but that kind of theater is called a chorale, and it was very important for the Spanish Golden Age, as was Lope de Vega. Okay, another important place was France. And the person most famous in France is Molière. You may have heard of him. He formed a company of actors called the Comédie Française, and it became France's national theater company in 1680. Okay, and this is kind of what it would have looked like at the time. He wrote many, many plays as well, not as many as Lope de Vega, but his theater troupe performed mostly his plays. There was some sort of big controversy in one of his most famous plays called Tartuffe, because Tartuffe is kind of, well, it's poking fun at the clergy. Basically, there's a clergy person who says that he's very devoted to God, but he's really a swindler, and he's swindling this man out of his house, marry his daughter, basically takes everything from him. And then when the guy calls him on it, finally, he's like, yeah, sorry, now I'm kicking you out of your own house. And luckily, the king saves them and comes in, and they realize that he's wanted in another town and arrest him and take him away. But the fact that they used the clergy as a villain made the church kind of ban him and the particular play. And so it wasn't performed very much when it was first came out. They finally ended up, you know, letting him back in and kind of forgiving the play. So And it wasn't really until after his death that it was performed more. So, but the National Theater, it still exists, and it was created in 1680, the Comédie Française. Comédie. I don't have a good French accent. Okay, so some productions or theater companies try to foreground a traditional approach. They try to go look back at what the original text meant, what it sounded like, what it felt like, and do a performance for those. But the majority of theater today, they take old text and they try to incorporate it and find meaning into today's culture. In their dynamic dialogue with today's values and questions. They transport to a new high concept play. The high concept means I'm going to take it and do something very different with it. And sometimes they'll put it in different settings or adapt the storyline so that it turns into meaning something for today's audiences. So this is Greek theater, you know, perhaps as it was meant to be performed with the masks and the traditional costuming. And this is Greek theater, obviously done in contemporary way. These enormous puppet things that look very scary. Ta-da! The end. I hope you enjoyed this particular section. All right, and that's a wrap on chapter 7. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks. Bye.